Did you know that Peter Jackson's Hobbit Trilogy had everything working in its favor? The director, who just completed one of the greatest film trilogies ever made, a beloved 300-page source novel with built-in nostalgia, a $745 million budget, and the full backing of Warner Brothers. Yet somehow, it managed to become one of the most divisive franchise attempts in modern cinema history. While the trilogy earned nearly $3 billion worldwide, which sounds impressive on paper, the films were met with critical disappointment and fan frustration that still echoes through Middle-earth discussions to this very day. So, how did movies that should have been a triumphant return to the world of Tolkien end up as cautionary tales about studio interference and bloated adaptations? Today, we're dissecting how the Hobbit trilogy became both a technical marvel and a creative misfire that couldn't escape the shadows of its predecessor. What the Hobbit got right: casting perfection. Before diving into the problems, it's important to acknowledge that the Hobbit trilogy made several inspired creative choices, and none more crucial than the casting of Martin Freeman as Bilbo Baggins. Freeman embodied everything that made Bilbo work as a character. The awkward mannerisms, the reluctant heroism, the fish-out-of-water quality that defined the entire story. His performance as a younger version of Ian Holmes' Bilbo felt authentic and earned, bringing genuine charm to every scene he inhabited. Freeman understood that Bilbo was fundamentally a normal guy thrust into extraordinary circumstances, and he played that reality beautifully. Whether delivering sarcastic quips to dwarves invading his home or matching wits with Gollum in a game of riddles, Freeman made Bilbo the emotional anchor the trilogy desperately needed. His chemistry with Andy Serkis during the Riddles in the Dark sequence created what many consider the best scene in the entire trilogy. Two masterful performances elevated material directly lifted from Tolkien's novel. The decision to bring back key players from The Lord of the Rings also paid some dividends. Ian McKellen returned as Gandalf with the same gravitas and warmth that made him perfect for the role all those years ago, even if the script didn't always serve him well. Christopher Lee, Cate Blanchett, and Hugo Weaving reprised their roles with the professionalism you'd expect from performers of their caliber. The production design maintained the visual consistency of the original trilogy, and Howard Shore's musical themes continue to evoke the grandeur of Middle-earth. Benedict Cumberbatch brought genuine menace and personality to Smaug through motion capture performance, creating a dragon that felt simultaneously ancient and theatrical. The scenes between Bilbo and Smaug crackled with tension, largely because both actors committed fully to the material. Richard Armitage's Thorin Oakenshield, while transformed into a more brooding figure than his book counterpart, delivered a performance that gave the character unexpected emotional depth. The fundamental problem. The central issue plaguing the Hobbit trilogy can be summed up in one decision that doomed pretty much everything else: transforming a single 300-page children's book into 3 epic-length films totaling nearly 8 hours. This was not a creative choice made in the service of the story. It was a business decision designed to replicate the financial success of the original Lord of the Rings trilogy. For context, Tolkien's Lord of the Rings spans roughly 1,200 pages across 3 books, each packed with multiple storylines, extensive world-building, complex themes about power and corruption, and numerous character arcs. The Hobbit, by contrast, is a straightforward adventure story about a hobbit accompanying dwarves to reclaim their homeland from a dragon. It's a children's fairy tale with a very simple structure. Bilbo and company encounter various obstacles, solve them, reach the mountain, and deal with the aftermath. Peter Jackson and his co-writers faced an impossible task, filling 3 films with material that could comfortably fit into 2 or even 1 longer film. The result was a trilogy stuffed with filler content that diluted the focused narrative of Tolkien's original work. Extended action sequences replaced character development. New subplots were invented wholesale to justify the runtime. The animated Rankin Bass adaptation from 1977 proved that The Hobbit could be told very effectively in 90 minutes. Even accounting for modern audiences expecting longer runtimes and more elaborate action sequences, there simply wasn't enough source material to justify nearly 8 hours of film. Every creative decision that followed stemmed from this original miscalculation. Production chaos, making it up as they go. The behind-the-scenes story of the Hobbit trilogy explains much of what went wrong on screen. When Guillermo del Toro was originally attached to direct, he spent years developing a vision for 2 films that would capture the fairy tale quality of Tolkien's book, while naturally connecting to The Lord of the Rings. Del Toro's departure due to scheduling conflicts and studio delays left the project in limbo. Peter Jackson stepped in as director, but unlike The Lord of the Rings, which benefited from years of meticulous pre-production, Jackson had mere months before cameras needed to roll. The director himself later admitted he never felt on top of the production, often writing and revising scenes the day they were filmed. Sets were finished hours before shooting began. The careful planning that made the original trilogy flow so seamlessly was replaced by frantic improvisation. The decision to split the planned 2 films into 3 came shockingly late in the process, July of 2012, just months before An Unexpected Journey's December release. This meant dramatic reshoots, rewrites, and reworking of material that had already been completed for a different structure. Scenes were moved around between films, new sequences were hastily added, and the overall narrative coherence suffered accordingly. Ian McKellen famously broke down in tears during filming because he was forced to perform alone against green screens rather than with his fellow actors. The reliance on digital effects over the practical craftsmanship that defined The Lord of the Rings stemmed partly from this rushed production schedule, and partly from new technology that seemed to prioritize what could be done over what should be done. The CGI problem, losing touch. One of The Lord of the Rings trilogy's greatest strengths was its blend of practical and digital effects. Prosthetics, miniatures, location shooting, and carefully deployed CGI created a Middle-earth that felt tangible and lived in. The orcs were actors in elaborate makeup. The battles used real stunt performers, and the environments grounded the fantasy in something resembling reality. The Hobbit Trilogy abandoned this approach almost entirely. Characters like Azog the Defiler were completely computer-generated rather than using any prosthetics work that made creatures in the original trilogy memorable. Action sequences defied physics to the point where tension evaporated. If characters could survive 500-foot falls and crushing mountains, how are you supposed to believe that they're in any real danger ever? The infamous barrel sequences from the Desolation of Smaug exemplifies this problem perfectly. What should have been a brief, tense escape scene became an extended video game-style action sequences where dwarves performed impossible acrobatic feats, Legolas defied gravity, and the laws of physics just ceased to work. The scene looked expensive and elaborate, but it also looked cartoonish, and it made it feel hollow because nothing meaningful was at stake. The decision to film at 48 frames per second rather than the standard 24 created another visual problem. The higher frame rate produced an unnaturally smooth image that many viewers described as making the film look like television soap operas instead of cinematic epics. Also, more frames means you can see more of the failure. Invented characters and pointless subplots. To justify 3 films, Jackson and his co-writers invented entirely new characters and subplots that distracted from rather than enhancing Tolkien's story. The most egregious example was Tauriel, an original character created solely to add a female presence to the male-dominated narrative. While the intention may have been admirable, the source material indeed lacked women. The execution was disastrous. Tauriel's primary function was as the center of a very forced love triangle with the dwarf Kili and Legolas, who himself had no business being in these films beyond any fan service. Legolas himself represents the trilogy's fan service problem. His presence made some kind of logical sense as the Woodland Realm's prince. He would have been home during these events, but giving him extensive action sequences and a personal vendetta against various orcs added nothing meaningful to the story. Orlando Bloom looked visibly older despite playing a younger version of this character, which required very distracting digital smoothing of his features. Azog the Defiler, barely mentioned in Tolkien's work, became a primary antagonist pursuing Thorin's company for personal revenge. His son Bolg joined the hunt as well, giving Legolas someone to fight, I guess. These invented elements crowded out the actual story, turning The Hobbit into something barely recognizable. The dwarf problem. 13 characters, 4 personalities. The Hobbit's company of 13 dwarves presented a genuine adaptation challenge, but the films failed to solve it effectively. In The Lord of the Rings trilogy, the 9 members of the Fellowship each have distinct personalities, motivations, and character arcs, despite similar screen time constraints. The Hobbit trilogy, with the same number of films at its disposal, could not manage anything close to the same feat for its dwarves. Beyond Thorin Oakenshield, who's just short Aragorn, most viewers would struggle to name more than 2 or 3 of the dwarves, let alone describe their individual personalities. There's the old wise one, the big angry one, the fat funny one, and then a generic mass of semi-identical beards and the designer stubble of the supposedly sexy dwarves. The film made half-hearted attempts to distinguish some dwarves, Balin as the elder statesman, Fili and Kili as the young, sexy ones, but most blended into the background because the script gave them nothing meaningful to do. This problem was compounded by the decision to make several dwarves look less like traditional depictions of the race. The company split time in between looking like hardened warriors and bumbling comic relief, with tonal shifts happening so rapidly that neither approach landed effectively. Too much studio intervention and too much money on the line meant that these movies were bound to be failures from the jump. But hey, that's just our opinion. What other beloved books do you think worked better or worse as film adaptations? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into Hollywood's most fascinating creative missteps and decisions. This video is made by movie fans for movie fans.